Hi, everyone. We're going to get started here. Thank you for joining us for today's Lunch and Learn. We have two great speakers for you joining us from the Oklahoma State School Boards Association, Amber Graham Fitzgerald and Dr. Joe Ciano. Amber serves as the Director of Member Engagement, where she assists administrators across the state with communication and human resource strategies that help build relationships and strengthen trust with members of their school community. Joe serves as the Associate Executive Director. He took the position after serving many years in superintendent roles around Oklahoma. Today, they are going to discuss the strategies you can use to manage and thrive during unprecedented community engagement in divisions. They will also help you and your districts learn how to take the current situations of division, doubt, and distrust and use them to grow relationships and strengthen partnerships with parents, community members, and more. During the presentation, you may pose any questions you have by raising your hand and I will take you off mute. Or if you want to get a good flow of communication, you can also ask questions in the Q&A feature and I will do my best to moderate them in. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to Amber and Joe.
Thank you, Taylor, and welcome everybody. We appreciate everybody's participation today. So Amber and I have been doing this presentation around the state of Oklahoma at our regional meetings where we have participating board members, superintendents, and other school administrators. And the discussion really kind of evolved out of many of the same things that you're probably experiencing in your state. The last 2 years, I think for all of us in education have been a challenge in a lot of different ways. But maybe no more than in our the stress it has put on relationships between communities, particularly, and school administrators and school boards. Our experience across the state is in boards where they've had really a solid relationship during up times and down times, and were able to work through those relationships. They found themselves in adversarial situations and having those experiences. And we know there's a lot of emotion involved with what's gone on in the last 2 years. So as Amber and I talked about, and as an association, as we talked about how can we best support our members and our leadership teams in our school districts, we talked about having this discussion on engagement during difficult times. But as a piece of this, we also recognize that the pandemic itself, this particular situation, is going to go away. And just like before the pandemic, we've all had difficult and challenging discussions in our communities. And after the pandemic, we're going to have difficult and challenging discussions in our communities. So in the end, Amber, what we came to was there are pieces and structures that if we keep those in the forefront in our school districts during good times, we'll be able to weather the challenging times. And we also came to the conclusion is the worst time to try and develop those relationships in our communities is during the difficult times. So in the end, we felt it really came down to is a more of a proactive approach to what are the things that we need to be doing in our school districts and emphasizing in our districts that will create a climate and culture that will help us breach those times that we may find challenges in our communities. So that's kind of where we are and where we're going to head today. We'd love you to interact with us. It's the first time we're doing this in this particular setting, type of setting. So it's really your lunchtime. Use it the way you think you need to would be most effective, and we'd be glad to interact with you on the things that you think are most important to talk about. So with that, I'll get Amber to kind of get us started.
So one of the things that we did is we asked as we talked about this with our members across the state, as we asked them to reflect on their experiences in the last 18 months regarding interactions with their parents and community members. I'm going to ask you to do the same thing today. And I hope that you'll be willing to share some of those. If not, by letting Taylor know you'd like to speak, certainly by sharing in the chat, then Taylor can share with us some of the feedback that she receives. Because one thing that we learned as we talked to our members is they were able to teach one another as much as we were able to share meaningful information with them. So we want you to have that same opportunity. In our state, we certainly have school districts, as Joe mentioned, who have dealt with very divisive issues, not because they happen just because of a pandemic, but it's certainly been escalated as a result of it. We also found, as we talked to members, that there were communities where they had really strengthened partnerships as a result of enduring this difficult time with their community. So the key and the things that we're going to be talking about as we move through here is how do you mend some of those relationships and strengthen them if you've had the opportunity to build them during this difficult time.
And I think, Amber, one of the things that when we asked our membership this particular question was, the current challenge was this being able to weed through information versus misinformation versus strategies, and being able to be clear with the community about how we were going to address these various issues. So this was a little different for them, and that's one of the things I think that they brought up as we talked to them was, we usually have pretty good communication sources and being able to get information out. But in this particular occasion, we found ourselves dealing more with misinformation than in past situations. So it made it more difficult.
And that's really where the need to be proactive really comes in when it comes to that. So as we talk, kind of think about, again, your experiences with your community and with your parents. So we're going to talk a lot about trust today because it really is the foundation of the relationships that we have with the public, with parents, with our internal staff, which we personally feel is really should be number one when it comes to that stakeholder group. I love this quote that it's the ultimate human currency. It really is the foundation upon which all relationships are built. So we're going to talk a lot about that today. So the next few slides are actually some of those strategies that Joe mentioned that we feel can help you build the kind of culture and build a foundation where you're proactive in your relationships, people know what to expect, and again, it's a big piece of building that trust.
You know, one of the things I think we have to recognize in school districts, and we have them of all different sizes in this state, is you can't always control the incidences that may occur in your district, but you have a lot of control about how you're going to deal with those instances. And in talking with principals in the school district I was in, we had 16,000 kids, we had 24 sites. One of the things we talked about was, if you have that many students, that many teachers, and there's interactions and things are going to occur, but we don't evaluate ourselves on if they did or they didn't. It's how we deal with those things. So are we a district or a building or a site that tends to try to say, you know, let's see if anybody finds out about that before we address it, or are you going to be transparent? And it goes back to that quote about trust. Once you lose trust, it's much more difficult to build it again. And it's almost impossible to build trust when there's been an occurrence that's a challenge for you or your district.
I learned very early on, if I was going to worry about controlling everybody's actions, I wouldn't get a lot of sleep at night.
That's right.
So that's what we focused on as well in the district where I worked, was making sure that we controlled our best response. In school districts, and especially communication professionals, I had the opportunity to work for 20 years as a school communication professional for a school district. We talk a lot about transparency, but we don't always talk about really what does that mean. And about 3 years into my career, I went to a workshop, and this was what the presenter asked the room. Are you the kind of school district that when something bad happens, because it's going to happen, because we're in the people business, it's going to happen. Are you the kind of school district who sweeps it under the rug or puts it in the backpack. Meaning, if something negative happened during the day, something we wished hadn't but did, are we going to let parents know and share with them the details? Are we going to do, as Joe said, sit around and wonder if we can get away with somebody not having that information? I believe that this is really the test of transparency.
Right.
Because parents, the next time something happens, parents know they can trust you. Even when it's bad news, I'm going to hear from the district. They're going to share the information with me. I'm an advocate. Sometimes I'll get, one of my jobs here at OSSBA is to help with crisis communication. And I might have a superintendent who says, well, nothing really happens. Nothing really happened. People are just saying this happened. Well, that is not another time. You want to make sure that they have accurate information from the school district and they know that they can trust you.
Well, and it's not this is not new. It's not new news to understand that perception. We all know this. Perception is more important than the actual facts anyway. So we have to we are in a perception business also. We're in a fact business, we're in a relationship business, and we're in a perception business. And one of the things about this idea of sweeping it under the carpet, or are you going to actually be upfront and getting information out in a transparent way? To me, one of the keys that make that successful, if you're going to be transparent, is acknowledging the situation that happened for what it was, but then also having a response in place of what will the district do? What will the school do? What are we going to do to rectify the situation and also to mitigate things like that happening again? And I think that's the piece that builds the trust is I found out what happened, the district recognizes it, and there is a plan to intervene or put in place things that will reduce those incidences from happening again. Again, things are going to happen. How you respond to them is how your community will anticipate you're going to respond in the future when there's challenges.
And that impacts your perception and your reputation as a school district as well. So continuing on that path of just proactive things we can do in our school districts to build this trust. I'm going to let you kick this one off because I love how you talk about this.
Well, also, let me ask this. Do you think has there been anybody out there that has any these experiences in the last couple of months or over the last few years that what we're saying kind of rings true to you, doesn't? And before we move on, we don't want to just assume that there's not any input, any thoughts from you guys. Nothing in the chat? Okay.
And we did let Taylor know, and she knows it's okay just to let us know and to stop us as we're talking. So please do contribute some feedback to her because we would love to hear it. This is one area where I'd really like to hear it because this is really when we talk about promoting and bragging on your school, making decisions and influencing people in a way that make them have positive feelings in your school. I like to talk about filling the goodwill bucket. And there are a lot of ways that we do that as a school district. When positive things happen in our district, when we have favorable results, maybe that's academic in nature, maybe that is because our athletic programs are being successful, it's because students are achieving the way that they should. My favorite way to fill the bucket and the way that it fills the fastest is about the personal interactions that members of the community have when they come into their school. If we were sitting in person and I asked you this question, a room full of people would know the answer. Who's one of the most important people in a school? Mm-hmm. The school office staff, because they are the ones who welcome and create that environment when people come to the school.
We as educators we're probably the worst at marketing what we do. And there's some history to that, and some of that history is, well, kids are going to be coming here. This is the public schools. We're going to serve the kids. They live in our community. They're coming to our schools. Well, I think, I'm sure in your state as well as here, things are transitioning. We're not always, there's a lot of discussion about choice, and a lot of we get agitated about these variety of choice options. And in the end, my feeling has always been is, you know what? We need to be the choice. So choice is not bad, but we need to be the choice. And how do we do that? We do that by marketing the things that we do well for students that nobody else can do. And I think there was a time when the things that the services that we would provide for students, even we took for granted as, well, that's just part of the job. We didn't see it as anything special. What we really need to do and talk to our community is, what are the positive news stories about our district? What are the things that make our districts unique? Why is it that we can do this better than anybody else? What are the communication tools that we have? You know, I'm one of the older guys, so I've been around a long time. There was a time we didn't have the quality communication tools, and I know that a lot of times we consider social media as our enemy, but it also can be a huge help to us if we use it appropriately. And then there's customer service. And again, depending on the size of your district, you really have to talk about that on a regular basis. 24 sites in our school district. People will judge you by what happens, what experience they have in their site. So what does it mean as a school district? How do we define that customer service? Because again, I'm just a big believer that if you treat people with respect and you have relationships, when the inevitable negative thing happens, most people will give you the benefit of the doubt. If you haven't built those relationships, most people will assume you made the mistake and it was on purpose or whatever it would be. So building those relationships is so key.
Which is why the bucket being full is so important, because we want to be sure that it's full so that it can sustain us when those negative things do happen.
It empties pretty quick.
Yes, it empties quick. It can go south pretty quick when something negative happens. We want to make sure that it is full. Research actually tells us that if somebody has a negative experience, this isn't specific to schools, but in general, they will tell as many as 16 people. So we have to remember how many positive interactions and experiences we need, particularly our families, to have when they're working with our team. It takes a lot to offset that one negative situation that might occur.
You know, it is funny. It's just a short funny story. Is this myths die hard? I mean, untruths die hard. It takes a long time. When I first went to the school district that I was in, we had two high schools. It was before we had air conditioning that throughout the whole district. And there was just this rumor at the newest of our high schools that we wouldn't turn on the air conditioning because the other high school didn't have it. It didn't matter how many places I went to that said, no, neither of them have air conditioning. But it was just this myth that had built within the community. And it took me multiple times addressing that to convince people that that was not the case anymore. And that happens all the time in school districts. So we have to address issues within our district on a regular basis. And coming from us is the best way for it to be successful.
And we do have to be so intentional, sometimes to the point that we feel like maybe we might be annoying or obnoxious.
No, we are annoying.
Yeah, that's true. That happens. Particularly communication pros can be. But when I started, I was told that I needed to make sure I put out information at least 5 times in order for people to be attentive to it. That number has since increased to 7 times. So that probably has to do with the way that our attention span is slanted in so many more directions.
And we also know in social media,
yes,
you know, the downside of social media and the change for schools has been, it's hard to stay in front of any one issue. So we really have to be diligent about it, much more so than in the past.
And as we continue to move through here, again, please share your stories, your experiences, ask questions. We would love to hear from you.
So this one, and Amber, you and I both can go through this, is a slide that just talks about this idea of structure of communication. Again, if you don't have a process of communicating and an order of communication, when you're not in a crisis, it's going to be hard to develop it when you are. So tends to be that the superintendent is early knowledge of what's going on. Again, there's the social media issues. So what happens after the superintendent or superintendent, the leadership team has been made aware of something that's going to be a challenge for the school district? You know, we believe that the first, and you begin getting those media calls about something that's occurred. Temptation, I got to respond to the media because they're asking. Our advice is you don't have any obligation of responding to the media immediately. You do have a responsibility to a lot of other people and then to media of getting it out. And, you know, we would say you have to respond, first of all, and reach out to the most impacted people as it relates to the incident. If I have an incident that involves a family or a group of kids, we are going to reach out to those individuals first to try to address that same problem. Also, for me as a superintendent, one of my first phone calls, text, emails, whatever I need to do would be to get my board members informed. And the reason I want to do that is they are going to get those first phone. They are the community. They're in the community. And I want to give them as much information as possible to alert them that the situation has occurred. Now, a lot of times we know you don't have all of the information, but you certainly can let your board members know that there has been an incident, you're investigating, and you'll get back with them when you have more details. Then, Amber, what about the rest of the staff that's out there? Because rumors begin going throughout districts, throughout buildings, after we've kind of informed that those first two groups. Absolutely. Where do you go from there?
Absolutely. You know, I'm going to talk to my school family next because they're going to get questions. They're advocates for the district. I also firmly believe the order in which we communicate is a way we demonstrate respect for people and that they're valued members of our school family. So staff and parents, I'm going to run those are going to be kind of run hand in hand because I always consider parents part of our school family as well. But with staff, they immediately, you know, there are things specifically they need to know. What does it mean to their building? I mean, there may be an actual implication even that they need to assist or to be aware of. So they're going to be very next on that list. A general message to the community. And then my personal opinion is that's when you focus on the media. What I encourage superintendents to do when they get a media phone call, if they have taken care of their most important audiences first, then they have the opportunity to say, I will share with you what I have already shared with parents. I used to be a member of the media. I believe in fully cooperating with the media, but I'm going to make sure members of my school community and members of my community know that they're going to hear from me directly, and then they're going to hear the same message from me through the media.
And there is an important role in the media, for the media in Absolutely. Terms of communications. And I'll be the first to tell you that if you're only going to call the media to do the good things, to kind of focus on the good things in your district, but you won't be responsive for the negative things, you are not going to have much of a relationship with your media. And I also was given advice a long time ago that if you don't respond to the media, they're going to look for something else, and they will find other things to report on. So the media can be a partner with you, but you have to be a partner on both sides.
Yes.
And but you're not responsible for creating the news. And that's where we make our mistake. We don't have to respond to the media first. We respond to the media at the right time when you have quality information to give them.
And then the one thing I also remind school administrators of, our first responsibility, you know, we don't always have school districts that are large enough where they have the luxury of having someone who solely oversees communication. Our first responsibility is the safety and security of our students and staff. Right. And so, you know, often all we are able to communicate immediately is this has occurred. Those in the building are safe. We will provide you with more information as soon as available because we have to take care of the needs of our school family first.
And we also know that we have certain constraints as to what we can provide any of that group. whether it's even board members during possible places where they might have to take some action down the road, whether it's an employee situation or a student situation. Certainly with the wider group of staff and parents, we're restricted, and we're very restricted what we can give the media. And we should never allow the stress of wanting to give information out push us to the point where we give information that we shouldn't. And the temptation is always, as a board member or as a district leadership, that when you really kind of know really what happened, you want to get that information out, but you know you can't. And I don't ever think it's appropriate. And if you want to lose trust in your community or with your parents or with your teachers, is put information out that everybody knows should be confidential to make yourself or the school district look better. We don't throw students under the bus. We don't throw employees under the bus to make ourselves as an institution look better. You may get a short-term gain there, but you're going to have a lot of long-term loss in terms of your integrity as a leader or your integrity as a board member. So it's a really delicate balancing act. You just have to be, what I believe is we have to be fair in what we put out, and we have to be thorough, and we have to be consistent, and we have to be timely. And that's all that people can expect of us.
And I do want to encourage you to think about the order in which you communicate, even in decisions that seem like everyday decisions. Like we would have a communication plan for when someone was leaving the district and someone was coming to the district, particularly in a higher profile capacity or an administrative capacity. And I'll tell you why we decided to do that. In the last part of my career, I oversaw both HR and communications. We were hiring an assistant principal in a building, and we had selected a counselor to take that job who was in another building. And we hadn't yet made the public announcement, but word had gotten out a little bit among the administrative team. And the counselor's principal called and said, "Amber, did you guys hire my counselor to move to this building?" Well, that wasn't right. That wasn't the way for her to find that out. She felt hurt. She felt disrespected, and rightfully so. And it can be damaging to those internal relationships. So even those things that seem every day, it's important to think through this process.
Exactly.
So I always just kind of think of it as the ripple effect. Those most impacted get to know first.
So think about, we've talked a lot about trust and relationships, and we kind of opened this whole discussion at the beginning saying that dealing with challenging situations in your district or just challenging discussions is really more about proactivity than being reactive. But trust is kind of a strange kind of thing. What is it? Think about this. Because we're no different as an institution than individuals. We're just a bunch of individuals that make up this organization. What is it about the idea of trust? Think about a person you trust. What is it about them that they deserve your trust? Why do you trust that individual?
Well, I can tell you when I think about individuals, and I kind of keep a close circle of trust. That's kind of that's just kind of how I'm wired. It's really those people that I know that I can count on, that will be confidential, those that will share with me what I need to hear, even when I don't want to, when we're maybe without an audience, but will be supportive of me when there is. But mostly people who are authentic, you know that there are sometimes different people that you would go to in different situations. Yeah.
And to me, it always has been, and that's whether it's people that I work with on a daily basis, people I associate with in social situations, and I think you can apply it to an institution. Does the institution or the individuals in that institution, to me, do they practice what they preach? So we are really good about schools about, we know the right things to say. Well, we care about all kids. We believe in parent involvement, except for we don't like certain parent involvement. Our behaviors don't always align with what we say. If we have our policies of inclusion, do we practice those things in our daily operations and how we work with kids? So to me, building trust within the community is the district says they believe these things. They have policies to support those things. And by the way, all of the people that interact with my kid behave in that way. That's building that trust. So again, when that challenging situation comes up, and even if there's passionate disagreement of how the district should approach something, or as a principal, we should approach it, or as a board member, they would love for you to approach it, and there's disagreement, that pattern of trust has been built there, and the pattern of behaviors that you can fall back on and say, but in the past, these are the things that we've believed in, and here's the way I've behaved in dealing with those situations.
I think of consistency when I think of people and of the institutions, that they do what they say. So it's interesting that you would use some of those words, because there is a book that talks about this very topic. So hopefully you have reflected now. Again, please put in the chat if you have any that you'd like to share with us. Qualities that are you find in those that you tend to trust individually. This book happens to say that these are 4 things that parents seek in school leaders and school employees: trustworthiness, authenticity, respectfulness, and forgiveness. I will tell you, I don't think there's a magic to these 4 words, because I think we could come up with 20 words that would describe what we want to be and qualities that we think are important. But I do want to encourage you, whether you are in a board member role or an administrator role, to reflect on the attitudes that you have as a school leader, the actions that you take on a daily basis in your role that demonstrate these qualities that are important. Because when parents come to us and we have these interactions, it's what they see. And one of the, I think, my executive director at OSSBA was actually also my superintendent when I worked in a school district. And he used to say all the time that we can only be responsible for our own behavior.
Right.
And when parents come to us, they come to us, it's often an emotional issue. I'm a mother. I get pretty emotional about things that are involving my students. But these are the qualities that we still want people to see and to be reflected, even when we're having those interactions with them.
Right. Right. And a lot of times the parents and the people that we're working with are emotional.
Yes.
And my feeling is, hey, if you're a parent, you're not emotionally advocating for your kid, who's going to?
That's true. Very
so
true.
We need to respect where I love the word empathy, because the word empathy is not just about understanding where people are coming from. It's putting yourself in the shoes of that person and then trying to react that way as a school district, as an individual administrator, as a board member, or as a school district. Is we have empathy for the people that we're working with. Sometimes they're going through difficult times.
Absolutely. So I love when you talk about listening with empathy. So let's talk about listening. We have had many discussions on our team, Joe, about the different ways a board member or a school administrator might want to deal with a situation when a parent comes to them with a concern. So do you want to talk just a little bit about that important listening?
Yeah, we do a lot of work, and I'm sure you do in North Dakota, of roles and responsibilities. And we talk about the roles of the board and roles of the administrator. And there was a time when we were talking about that role, when we would define it by its legal definition for board members. And the legal definition is really you can't do much as a board member in terms of taking action unless you are meeting as a board. And I think we were sending somewhat of this message of you're not a board member unless you're meeting as the board. And I have a real belief that if you're an elected board member, you're always a board member. Now, what you can accomplish may be different as an individual versus as a collective member of this board, taking responsibility in your community. But as a board member, we have a responsibility. I believe we have a responsibility to listen and be reflective back to people that are having concerns, getting them to the right place. But I just believe listening with empathy means listening and putting yourself in their position. One of the things that we should talk to administrators about, Amber, is you get that phone call from an upset parent about something in your district, something that's occurred, something that's impacted their kids. And as an administrator, or maybe even as a board member, you're sitting there and you know actually the answer to that question because maybe there's a really clear legal definition of what they're asking you to do or wanting you to do. What I always found helpful is to listen to that person. And even if I knew what the answer was, to say to them, you know what, I'm gonna have to look a little bit further into that. Let me think about what your concerns are, and I will get back with you. Because it gives the sense to the individuals that you're working with that you really have listened to it and you're taking their concerns into consideration. If you give them the answer immediately, even if it is the right answer, I think you break a little bit of that trust and confidence that you are really there to understand what their concerns are. So it's just a little tool, and it doesn't take a lot of time.
And sometimes when you reflect on it, you do see a different side.
And sometimes there are, you come up with other solutions
Yes.
that you hadn't thought about right at that moment. Because we are supposed to be solution-oriented people. As board members and as administrators, our job is about finding solutions. So that's a really good point.
So we've got just a few slides that kind of deal with finding solutions, about correcting mistakes, resolving conflict. But this slide is really kind of an overall for everything we're going to talk about for the next few minutes. It's so important as we're having these discussions and we're listening with empathy that we're listening to truly understand. It is so easy, and I am guilty myself, of having a conversation where even when I have the best of intentions, I am really thinking about what I am going to say next, as opposed to listening to that individual. And when I find myself doing that, it is often with the best of intentions because I'm being so careful about what it is that I might share next.
Right.
But it really is important to stop, to make sure that you're collecting every bit of their concern, that they feel heard, that you truly are hearing them. And we're going to talk about some examples of how to do that. So let's talk about how to correct mistakes. I don't know about you, but I do that every single day. And a lot of times they were my own. So that just happens. Yeah.
I've spent a career apologizing for stuff that I really didn't do, but it's better to apologize because, I kind of joke about that. But even when you have this discussion about something that a parent has or a student has experienced, even though it wasn't actually what occurred, they still have that feeling. So it is okay to apologize and say, hey, I am really sorry that you heard that in that way, or that you experienced that incident in that way. That's not what our intention was. Apologies go a long way. And they also begin reducing, we talk all the time about, are we going to reduce stress in a situation, or are we going to escalate stress? And sometimes by our mannerisms and our language and our response, small issues become escalated, and then you really do begin to have those difficult discussions. But maybe you've kind of accelerated that discussion.
I don't know why, but there tends to be a hesitancy to say, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
When I, in fact, believe the quickest way to de-escalate is especially if we know we've made a mistake, I'm sorry that happened. Here's what we've done to correct it and to keep it from happening again. I think it is the quickest way to de-escalate. One of the things I found often too, if we had gotten ourselves in a situation where we couldn't maybe deliver what we had promised, or there had been some incorrect information that had been shared, is sometimes I couldn't fix the problem for them, but if I explained to them why I was unable to, which almost always leads back to policy, which almost always leads back to what is best for students.
State law sometimes.
Yes, and yes, state law, things that are not outside of that are outside of our control. But the bottom line is, if I could explain why I was unable to deliver on exactly what they wanted, but why we chose what we did because it was best for students, that was often more easily understood.
And that kind of leads into the next one. And again, one of the things that we talked about a lot in our district was we deal a lot, anybody can deal in black and white. And if you're in a leadership position in a school district or you're a board member, you're going to deal with a lot of grays. And the grays is where you build relationships and build trust. And so when you think about responsiveness, if we are responding to our patrons and our community with, well, we can't do that, and that's the period, that's the end of the sentence, I don't think you're building and taking the opportunity to build much in terms of trust and relationships. But if you say we can't really do that, because sometimes we can, but here's 4 things we can do. In most situations, you de-escalate and you will come to some understanding of something, even though if it's not the thing that they wanted, it'll be something that's close. So again, we should be build relationships and trust by being solution oriented, not giving back black and white policy or law, because they don't always solve the problem.
And then, of course, always to remember the golden rule. I will say, working in the school business, I believe that there's a rule more important than the golden rule. I call it the platinum rule. Treat my children the way you want your children to be treated. That's like the highest standard that there is, making sure that we're doing everything. It's a parent rule. That's right. So resolving conflict, we've talked a lot about listening with empathy. It goes a long way when resolving conflict. Always really important to separate our personal feelings too. Sometimes it can be hard to do that because we've got some we have previous relationships with the people involved, but it's important when there's conflict. One of the ways that I have found not only helps me gather information that I need to help them with their situation, but also helps them understand that I'm listening, is to ask clarifying questions. You know, if they tell me about an incident that occurred in a school, you know, asking them to clarify when did that happen? Have you had an opportunity to talk with this individual? I will even use the phrase, I want to be sure I understand, so can I repeat back to you what you've shared with me? And it helps, I think, because they know I'm really trying to put myself in their shoes.
And this goes back a little bit to that difficult role as a board member versus an administrator. We need for the school people to actually resolve these issues for families, because as a board member, you don't always have the all the options that are out there at your fingertips. But asking the clarifying questions as a board member is okay, and it gives you the opportunity to say, well, based on what you're asking and what you're saying, here's the person that I think can most quickly resolve your situation. Sometimes it's the superintendent, sometimes it's somebody else within that staff. Maybe it's the teacher, maybe it's the principal. But asking those clarifying questions, again, without getting to too much of it in detail of the incident, helps you, number one, get them directed to the right person, but also shows that patron or that constituent that you are listening, and that's what your role is to help facilitate them getting to the right person.
And when we talk about referring to others, it's definitely important when we're talking about maybe a board member's approach. It can even be important, I think, when the school team is involved. Mm-hmm. Just as we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, the stronger your relationship with somebody when you deal with a difficult situation, the smoother that situation is likely to be resolved. So, you know, if there was an emotional issue and there was a member of our school team that we knew had a positive, strong relationship, had already built that trust, and had a relationship with that family, we would be very intentional about who reached out about that difficult situation. So always refer that when necessary. And anytime we can, we want to have win-win. There are things that we can do and can't do as a school district, because I agree, gray is always important, but we also got a little bit of black and white. Sure. And so anytime we can come up with a solution where we have done what is best for the district in the sense that it's best for our student body as a whole and resolve an issue for a family, I think that's good as well.
and there's also times where we have to recognize as a school district that the situation itself may not be in our tool bag to resolve.
Right.
So, I mean, I think one of the things we've experienced during the pandemic has been we're not health providers. We don't know all the answers on health. So we had to defer some of our work and our decisions to somebody, to another group. And that's really difficult for school districts, is to rely on somebody else's advice and how we would deal with our students and our community. But sometimes it's appropriate, and we have to recognize when that is, and then talk to our community about why bringing this person in to have this discussion is it the best interest of our students and the community in general.
Sometimes we're not very good about that, even with small issues with the
Yeah.
media. There are issues that we often try to address that really are law enforcement issues. I remember that even the media used to, if we had a power outage, they would call and ask why the power went out. And I would have to say, well, I can't explain
I don't
that
know.
to you. I don't work for the power company. I can tell you how we fed children while the power was out, but you'll have to call this other company to do that. So even in those small situations, make sure we're getting those to the right people. So of course, it's always great if we could just avoid tough situations when they're not necessary. And I do believe there are some things we can do to be proactive in that area as well. Part of it begins just with listening to others, trying to survey, whether that be formally or informally. Informally is just as important. As things begin to trickle to the surface, that we address them. Situations are always, and conflict is always resolved closest to a source, in my opinion. The longer we let it fester, the more difficult it can be. So being sure that we're listening, kind of having an ear to the ground about things we need to be concerned with and we need to address. Confirming information before sharing it seems simple, but it's a really big one. Misinformation is always difficult. It's particularly difficult if a member of the school team has been the one that shared it. And then of course, just communication. If you've built that trust, they know you're going to be transparent. They know they're going to hear from you. It can really help you deal with the situation before it escalates to a point that's difficult to deal with.
You know, that whole idea of anticipating and predicting problems as a school district, considering policies, you're considering implementations of different initiatives. The key is anticipating and predicting the challenges with that implementation, so you can, again, mitigate those situations. It also builds trust. So are you asking the right questions when you're adopting a policy? Or are you asking the right questions when you're implementing, doing some type of initiative? I remember talking about grants are notorious as districts. We always never have enough resources, so grants are brought to us. Do we ask the questions related to that grant before we do it about what's the sustainability of this grant? So we're going to do something really good for kids for a year or two, and then all of a sudden have to yank it out because we didn't anticipate that we couldn't sustain it down the road. These are really important questions because they build that, again, they either build or undermine trust as we go forward.
And I would add that too. Are you asking the right questions of the right people? Are you making those decisions behind a closed door, opening the door, and not getting feedback from those people who are really going to be responsible for those processes? One of my favorite communication tips that I ever learned, I think it was a school district in Missouri, they put a sign in their boardroom that said, "And how will we communicate this?" So anytime they did anything new, that a new policy, new procedure, new initiative, they did not stand up from the table until they talked about how they would communicate. I think that's wise.
Really
That's the way to move in a successful direction. So we've got the scenarios next. When we were in a room with our members, we kind of let them have some time to discuss this. Let's share them, Joe, and we'll kind of let them have some thought and talk.
And see if we can get some feedback either about
absolutely.
what we've talked about, or if we're down to about 5 minutes.
Yes.
So maybe it would be good for them to have an opportunity to reflect on some of the things we've talked about, or give us some ideas so that the next time we do this, we can do it even better and build in some more thoughts.
So I'll go ahead and share one if that's okay. So we just wanted to give our members and would like to give you time today kind of think on what does this look like in real life practice, the things we've talked about today. So here's a scenario that some of our school board members have have faced over the last 12 months. While shopping one day, a parent stops you in the store. She proceeds to ask why educators in the district have been instructed to teach critical race theory and what, as a board member, you intend to do about it. You know the district is not teaching CRT. How do you de-escalate the situation and help her see the truth? So please, we would love to hear from some of those of you watching. You can use the chat. And we'll go, if we don't get feedback, we'll go fairly quickly. But I think a lot of the things we talked about today really fall in this line, because one important thing to do is, even though the information is correct, for her to feel heard.
Yeah.
And that you've listened to
I mean,
question.
this is a primary example of where, as a board member or as an administrator, you could shut somebody down and not appropriately understand where they're coming from. So the answer may be, if we don't do CRT in our district, but the question is somebody thinks you do, or there's a perception. So how do we, listening and understanding is really key, that clarifying questions. Again, this is one of those deals of, in my view, it's how we approach it as a school district or as an administrator. Do you want to be heard? Does the person feel heard or not?
And I often in a cabinet level position kind of felt in the same role in some situations, like we talked, that I really wanted them to talk with the person closest to the situation so they could understand. So I would often use the phrase, I know Mrs. Smith would be more than happy to visit with you. If you wanted to learn more about what kids are learning, I know that Mrs. Smith would be more than happy to listen to you or to visit with you. Is it okay if I share your information with her? Or, I think that there are ways for it to feel like I am here to assist you, and the assisting is really getting the correct information instead of the incorrect information.
Well, again, in disregarding what people say and setting it aside, only reinforces that you're hiding something.
Yes.
Right? If you don't want to have the discussion, there's got to be a reason why you don't want to have the discussion.
Right. That's right. And it's important to have it. We need to step towards these conversations, not away from them, or that just continues. So the second scenario we had, and we had a lot of school districts in the state of Oklahoma who dealt with this summer. Over the summer, your school district is waiting for additional guidance from health officials to complete your return to learn plan, which is what we call our plans to make sure students were safe from COVID when they came back to school. Several citizens consistently contact you and the other school leaders with questions and concerns, and they tag you in social media posts. Feeling unheard, they create a Facebook group and accuse the district of not being ready for the school year. More than 150 people joined the group in 3 hours. How could this situation have been avoided, and what do you do now? Well, as a communication professional, this is one that I really love, because if you got 150 people who want to give you feedback, it'd be an excellent opportunity to use the feedback. Certainly in this scenario, there are places where you can see this trickling, coming to the surface, and it continues to escalate, where in the beginning, had they felt heard, it could have been a positive situation where the school district really involved parents and community members in some of that decision making.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be situations where you can't really avoid this happening. But if you're at a board meeting and 150 people have shown up and they're already, the tensions are already high, you have to, at some point, think back and reflect on where were the points where it could have been de-escalated. And a lot of times those were little things that could have been done. You ignore an email, you ignore a phone call, you set aside something that probably needed to be addressed. I had a professor a long time ago, and I came from maybe more of an old school approach that said, if he got a complaint or a concern sent to him on his desk, he left it there for 4 days. If it was still a concern, then he would answer it. That's, that doesn't work today, because not only will it still be there, it will have multiplied by the time you get to it.
And created a Facebook group.
And create a Facebook group. Sometimes it's unavoidable.
Yeah.
But I think what we have to do is have what we would suggest, and our experience tells us, the more structures I can have in place that open dialogue and open engagement, the less chance I'll end up in this situation. And if I do, there's going to be a lot of people out there who may see it a different way also that can actually advocate for you on Facebook and say, no, that's not the way the school district has dealt with that in the past. And that's really what you need.
And I would want to be aware of the people who've been involved in this process, because we know we have something coming down the pipe. They are likely to be engaged in it again.
Yeah.
And so I know that these are people that I want to try to be filling that bucket with, having conversations, make sure they know what's going on with the district, what's going right, and that they can trust us when something goes wrong.
I mean, I think I find that the quickest way to shut down one of these Facebook group that are really generating a lot of challenges in the district is to have other people get on that are advocates for your district, because you built that relationship and trust that they're willing to step in and say, no, that's not the way this particular thing occurred, or better them than you. You need advocates in your community.
The way we used to need it, and in some cases still need that advocate at the coffee shop, we now need them in that social media.
Social media, certainly.
Well, having said that, if those threads are happening on your social media page, the district social media page, I've found it very effective to say, I'd love to hear more about your concern. Please, this is Amber Fitzgerald. This is my title. I would love to hear more about your concerns and do my best to assist you. Call me at this number. I almost always never heard from them, and I almost always never saw another post from them. So it's just important for them to know there is an outlet for you to share that information more productive.
And I bet you what you did see is somebody else on Facebook saying, hey, she gave you her telephone number, and either call her or stop.
Yes,
right?
Yeah. So that is the conclusion of our presentation today. I know we're running close to time. Taylor, at this time, I'm going to turn it back over to you, and just know that we would love to hear any feedback, input, or answer any questions.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today, and thank you to Amber and Joe for the exceptional information. Please feel free to contact Amber and Joe for further information. You can access it on the recording and the presentation and the PowerPoint on the website under our events page under the Lunch and Learn webinar series tab. Our next Lunch and Learn is scheduled for January 19th. We have not yet determined a topic, so please stay tuned for that. And then you can access more information about our Lunch and Learn webinar series on our website on the events page. Thank you again, Joe and Amber. We really appreciate having you here with us today. Happy holidays, everyone, and to your loved ones. Bye-bye.